Amazing. Hello, everyone. Give you a few seconds to hop on. For those of you who are new here, my name is Sarah. I'm the co-founder of ArtSnacks, and I wanted to welcome you all to the first ArtJournalSnacks live stream of the summer box. So hopefully you'll be creating something cool with Dr. Erin today. I am going to be sort of lurking in the background. I'm going to let Erin teach her lesson. But I do want to just give a heads up that the ArtJournalSnacks live stream will be recorded. So if you have to leave early or need to skip out or anything like that, don't worry, it'll be recorded so you can watch it later tonight or tomorrow, right on our YouTube channel. You'll also have an opportunity to ask questions, so please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll do our best to read and respond to them verbally. And for those of you who don't know, Dr. Erin is an art therapist, but she is not providing therapy in this setting. So with that said, Erin, I am going to spotlight your surface, and let's get creative.
Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be with you today for the summer box. And I first want to apologize for my hands. I was painting a mural at work today, and so I'm still a little bit covered in acrylic paint. And hopefully some folks from Enzo Village are also going to be joining us today, either live or later viewing it. So we are going to jump right in, and what we'll do today, just to give you a heads up of where we're going to start, we're going to talk first about starting a journal, because I know for some of you this art journaling process is maybe new or new-ish, and that whole big white blank book can be a little intimidating. So we'll go through some of how to address that. We'll look at the materials that we received in this month's box, or this quarter's box. We'll look some at the ephemera and talk specifically about that. And then we'll do the bonus prompt, as well as the thing we've been doing with every first live stream, which is one material 3 ways. Okay, so let's get started. So I've already started my journal because I like to start it right away. So you can see mine's already got a little bit of ink on it and a little bit in here. And then I found this, which just felt like, well, that is the perfect little piece of ephemera to start this summer journal box off with. So I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to put it on the cover or the inside front cover. So TBD on that one. And I wanted to, let's see, let me get myself to a blank page here. I've already put a bunch of stuff in here preparing for today. Okay, here we go, a nice blank page. Okay, so one of the things that I love about this journal is that it is stitched. And the nice thing about a stitched journal is first of all, it holds together really well. And then also you get this added bonus of materials kind of seeping through where the stitching is, which can help with that blank page anxiety. But some of you may have experienced this when you took the journal out of the box, like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of pages. How am I going to fill all these pages? What am I going to do? And so I just really, really encourage you to get right into it. And the Aqua Drop watercolor is such a great way to do it, because you cannot help but put a bunch of color down on the page. Okay, so I got magenta, and if you want to share what color you got, you should share. And many of you know that I am a big advocate of just go straight from the bottle with these liquid watercolors, because it's just fun and really satisfying. So I'm gonna just blend this around, and all of a sudden this book is not feeling intimidating at all, because look at this bright color that's in here. And because I'm painting it pretty heavy right into the stitched gutter of the book, it means that beautiful bright magenta color is going to go some other places too. So one of the other reasons I like squeezing the paint right out of the dropper is you get a little ghost of the line from where you put the dropper to the page, which means you get some neat effects from that on the page itself, as well as on the page before and the page after, right? So there's a little bit of a ghost of the dropper. You can see it here as well. Okay, so that's one way I start, is I just open to a random page and just fill it with color, right? And just see what happens. So another of the materials that we got was a Liquitex paint marker, and I got a super neon color. I can't get much brighter and more summery than that. I'm a child of the 80s, so this neon is so summer to me. I definitely had like some hypercolor shirts and some bathing suits and summer clothes that were this color. I'm not sure this is exactly a flattering color to wear, but it sure is a fun color to work with, right? And you might think to yourself, I don't know about neon, but the neat thing about neon is it does play really well with other colors. You can see when I put this magenta, this is the leftover magenta on my brush, when I put it over that, I get this interesting orange that starts looking not so neon at all, right? So don't be afraid to combine materials that you might think, I don't know about that, right? That seems a little unconventional, and that's really what I think an art journal is for exploring some of these unconventional combinations and trying different things. All right. And you notice that with the pages so far, I've just closed them without using the wax paper like I normally do, and this Liquitex marker dries pretty fast. So I think we'll be okay to turn this page without the paper sticking together. Okay, so I'm turning now to kind of the perfect next message for us, because it fits with what we've been talking about so far, this idea of artistic freedom. And one of the goals for me of facilitating these sessions and working with ArtSnacks to do this art journaling practice with you all and sharing this practice that has been so important for decades now of my life is it's really been about finding that artistic freedom, right? Finding ways to be creative, finding ways to bring my creativity with me everywhere. And art journaling has been a big part of that. So I always save some of the box and some of the tape from the box, and it seems like it would be just a really nice thing to put here as part of this artistic freedom message. So I'm going to go ahead and take the lid off my Nori paste, which we'll be sharing more about all the various uses for Nori paste. It says paste in the title, but don't let that fool you. This can be used in so many different ways. And like their little subhead says, it's the perfect paste for the perfect project. Not that your projects have to always be perfect, but it is perfect paste. So you may have discovered this little thing on the top. You just pull that off. It's just a little piece of paper. And actually you can use some paste straight from there. And that's just to keep the paste from sticking onto the lid when it's shipping. The other nice thing about Nori paste is, unlike some other adhesives, it doesn't make your fingers quite as sticky when you're in the middle of using it. So the water wipes that I like to use and have around work really well for cleaning off after that, which of course now I can't find that. Okay. So when I'm working, and I know I'm going to be working on a lot of pages all at once, I like to have just water wipes around. Really important that they're just the plain water kind. If they have any kind of solvent in them or anything, it might get onto your paper. Okay, so the other nice thing about Nori paste is it blends really well with other media. So I'm going to blend a little bit of the watercolor that's still hanging out in my brush. And it depends on the kind of thing that you're sticking down, how much you need to use, and whether you use it straight from the little tub or if you water it down. This is kind of thick because the tape pulled off a little bit of box behind it. But what you'll find is you get this really stable adhesion to the paper. And it's maybe a little less frustrating because it's not quite as liquidy as some of the like Mod Podge and some of these other tools, which are lovely. And you all know I'm a glue stick fan, but this is really nice because it just beautifully adheres to the page and almost starts to feel like it's part of the page. And then you can mix it with other paper. So I'm going to take a little bit of beautiful rice paper that has some fibers in it and just add that in. So again, that's the nori paste mixed with a little bit of watercolor that's just still hanging out in my brush. And so really quickly, this is starting to become an interesting page. And then the other thing that I like about nori paste when you're in the middle of a journaling session is it's very, very water soluble. So you don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, I'm sitting here journaling for 90 minutes and I'm ruining all my brushes in the meantime because I've got matte medium on one of them and glue on another. You don't have to worry about that. So this one, because it is a little sticky, I'm going to put a little bit of wax paper in there before I turn the page. And actually, I'm going to go back a bit from here. And pull out another material. So actually, what I think I'll do is, because the colors are right, is work a little bit on this page that I started. So this was a piece of ephemera that came in the mail. And it's got California poppy on it, so it seems just exactly right. Now, this can be a difficult material for some people. Some people are very reactive to soft pastels. I happen to love them. And look how beautiful these ones are with this page that I already started. And I started this page before I knew which colors I got. So I had no sneak peeks, but this page just seems to be begging to have some of this chalk on it. Now, one of the things that you can do is use the chalks to draw, right? And you can use them and blend them with your fingers. But you can also put them down and you can move them around a little bit with water, right? So if just blending chalk is bothersome to your fingers, some people don't like the tactile experience of that. There's so many other ways to use these materials. So don't be afraid of them. I promise you'll find a way to use them and end up really enjoying the process, right? So look how vibrant it is when you put it into a wet page, right? It kind of stands up on the surface, but it's more matte than the crayon that I already had on this paper. And you can start to get a little bit more of that green of the poppy on this page. And this is an interesting thing. You find sometimes with ephemera that you get in the mail, you maybe make the assumption that it was high quality printed, but you can see that the black is moving around, which tells me this was printed on a cheap printer, right? It's not a laser print, but that's fine because it kind of blends it down a little bit more into the background. All right, so I want to bring out a little more orange on this page, so it's a colored pencil stick. I'm just going to go over the top of this a little bit. Now this chalk and the paint marker end up telling me that probably I am going to end up making my my challenge page in neon yellow. Okay, and so again, if this happens, no problem. You can smear some of your fingerprints on there and end up making an interesting pattern. Or you can use your water wipe and just wipe a little bit of that away. I never promised you that art journaling would be neat and clean. All right. So this one doesn't have anything sticky on it, so I'm just going to go ahead and turn the page. All right, so this page seems just right to end up playing with a challenge. So in our menu, which comes in every box, each time there's a bonus prompt. And for the fun of it and just kind of model this idea of ephemera comes from everywhere, I have been cutting my prompt out and gluing it onto the page every time. Just so as I'm flipping through the journal later, I remember like, oh yeah, that was from the prompt. Right. So there's my bonus prompt. So pick one color and create a whole page using at least 3 media in that color. And notice that I said in this prompt, at least, which means that you could use more. And I've got 2 right here. So I have the Liquitex paint marker in fluorescent yellow, and then I have the Sennelier chalk in this like beautiful color. And if you haven't played with these before, put any ideas that you have about chalk pastels that were like the cheap ones that you used when you were a little kid in school. These are so heavy. I mean, this is like a really heavy piece of chalk. And look how vibrant it is, right? So we're going to start with chalk. And the word bold there, I put on this page. I didn't really have a plan yet for what else was going to go onto the paper. Those are rub-on letters from back in my graphic design days. All right, so now I've got some nice, super bright yellow, and I'm going to blend that with my fingers. Okay. Nice and bright fingers. All right. And so now, let's see, I know I'm going to use that, but I want to find one more thing that's kind of in that fluorescence range. And I have this yellow colored pencil stick and a yellow crayon stick. I want something a little bit more neon. Let's see if I have anything else around here. I have a little bit of the watercolor palette in front of me, and I've got like a lemon yellow in there, which I think will work. I'm just gonna do a little bit of that. Maybe I'll use those guys too. But so another thing that I enjoy doing in my art journal, and I do this pretty frequently, I always have my art journal with me at my desk at work, on airplanes, after work when I'm sitting with the parrots, just relaxing, always with me. And sometimes I have a plan for what I want to create, and sometimes I just like to make marks and add color. Okay, here we're getting that at least 3 colors, right? A little bit more bold with this very bright yellow. So this is watercolor over the top of the chalk. Which is probably breaking some of the rules, right? We have all these ideas about rules, about which art supplies play well with others. And one of the things I'm hoping that you're, maybe that's rubbing off on you a little bit, no pun intended, from the chalk, but I hope what's rubbing off on you all is this idea that you can really do whatever you want, right? Like, learn how to use the material, yes, but then make it your own and play with it in the ways that are interesting to you. Now this little word bold ends up looking kind of funny there and kind of lost. So I want to find some way to make that stand out more. And so the neon paint pen might be the way to do that. Let me fill this in a little bit here. So I have all these little dashes that go around the edge of the prompt. So I'm going to pull a little bit of that patterning in. echoes of the other patterns that are on this page. So now we'll play with this fluorescent yellow, and the thing that came to mind for me was like, what about a big, bold fluorescent arrow pointing this way? Like boldly go forward. I like the chisel tip paint pens because you have a lot more options with them. You can do a pretty fine line, you can do a big bold line, you can fill in areas very easily, and even get a little bit calligraphic with it. Okay, so there's my bold arrow. It still feels like it needs something. And the text here is a little bit more of an orangey color. So I might pull in something like that, but I'm thinking what I want to do is actually use the material that I haven't used yet, which is this beautiful pen. And if you've gotten this out and you haven't played with it all the way yet, know that it has both this beautiful brush tip as well as a very lovely little fine tip. So hot tip, if you're using this or loaning it to other people, just make sure that they're aware that this lid goes on the small side and the big lid goes on the big side, because it's really heartbreaking if someone takes your pen and mashes the little end on your beautiful brush tip. So friends don't let friends ruin markers. This will help my bold arrow stand out quite a bit more. And then since I have those other marks, I'm going to make them switch to this one. Just kind of fill this in a little bit, make it look a little bit more cartoony. The thing I like about the tip of this pen is it's a little bit flexible, which feels really nice when you're making marks. It's also really, really nice for writing. And sneak peek, we're going to do, by special request, we're going to spend at least one of our live streams talking about incorporating text and writing into our journals in a way that feels a little bit more cohesive. That's the question someone had. Okay. There's my bold arrow. I feel like what I want is something neon right here, like another piece of ephemera maybe that's like very, very bright. So this page might stay unfinished for a little while I figure out what that might be and what that looks like. Okay. So I'm going to set this aside for a little while so this can dry. I don't want to close this onto wax paper because it's got puddles of watercolor and they will move around. So I'm just going to set that one aside for a minute. And I'm going to pull out my ephemera envelope because there's a couple things, and I think I mentioned this on Mix, but if I didn't, I want to make sure I mention it now. And if you are new or don't know, every Art Journal Snacks box comes with an envelope of ephemera that I hand select and count out and put together for you. And the other day I was trying to figure out the math of it all, like how many times do I count to the number of ephemera envelopes that I put together with each of these individual items, and hot tip, it's a lot. But I wanted to talk about one thing in particular that's in your small envelope. So you may have noticed some tissue paper pieces, usually probably a circle of some kind, and then some smaller pieces like this. And this is one of the inspirations behind our very, very colorful box this time. This is a bleeding art tissue. And if you've not played with this before, you're in for a treat. I'll find a blank page here. So there's a couple different ways that you can use this. And one of them is just get your page completely wet. You can do that with a big brush or with a spray bottle. So that's one way. Another way is to put the paper down first and put the water on top. I don't find that to be quite as effective. And then some people like to put the paper down just as it is. I'm a big fan of, and this might make some of you cringe, but I'm going to do it anyway. I like to crinkle it up and then spread it back out, because you end up with these wrinkles that then make the pigment do interesting things. Okay, so I'm going to get my page very wet, and then I'm going to put the bleeding tissue down with some wrinkles into it. And if you got white, don't be afraid. The white will do things also. If you got black or brown, don't be surprised if other colors come out of those colors. And this is one of those techniques that does require a little bit of patience. So sorry if you're an impatient person, you do have to let this dry. Luckily for me, it's extremely hot in Healdsburg today, so mine is going to dry pretty quickly. You can see already that the pigment is moving around on the page, and it actually gets some pigment onto your brush. So you can almost watercolor with the pigment that comes out of the bleeding art tissue. And see how I'm letting the wrinkles kind of soak up the water quite a bit. And you can see that the green is starting to go into the wrinkles on the red there. And the red is starting to come out from there. I'm going to save these 4 pieces for a minute. Because one of the other things that you can do with bleeding art tissue is go back in with some other watercolor. Kind of mix it in. This is that same yellow I was using on the other page. See how much that green is moving? And now another tip with this, and some of you have heard me say this before about other materials, like when we're doing collage, to save the pieces that you cut off. And you definitely want to save the bleeding art tissue when it dries, because it ends up becoming like this other interesting piece of ephemera that you can play with. Okay, so I've only put this on one part so far because I wanted to do something, which is, this is very wet. I'm going to take this page and fold it back and press it down. More to come about that little car stamp. And then I'm going to open it back up. And it's not going to be as vibrant as other butterfly pages like that, but it is, you can see there's quite a bit of pigment coming off of this tissue paper. That also serves the function of pressing the tissue paper very flat, which will make it dry a little more quickly. Okay, I'm just going to play a little bit here with some of these drippy areas, just to help this page dry a little more quickly. Okay, so just 2 pieces of tissue paper and 1 color of watercolor, but quite a bit of pigment and color ended up on this page. Okay, so we'll set that one aside to dry. And I wanted to pull out, I usually, when we do these live streams, I usually have 3 journals with me. So this is the 3rd journal. This is my little personal art journal that I'm working in right now. It's one that I created. It's bound with ribbon and has a brad on the front to tie ribbon around to hold it closed. It's a little bit flimsy in that some of the book pages that I used on the inside of this are a little thin, which means that so it's a modified accordion bound book, but some of the pages are a little flimsy. You can see this is a little bit a little delicate. So I have to be kind of careful with this book. But I wanted to play on this page because it's another way to use the chalk that you may not have thought about. So this is black watercolor ground. So yes, you heard me right. It's black watercolor ground, making a surface that you can watercolor onto that's dark. So what does that look like, Erin? So if I go with this very pale yellow, I can paint with watercolor on the top and see how beautiful and vibrant that ends up being. And watercolor ground makes any surface very absorbent. And hot tip, your nori paste can also make a nice surface to watercolor on. So if you have paper that feels like it's not gonna hold your paint very well, right, it's kind of glossy, like magazine paper, you can paint a little bit of nori paste over top and then your watercolor will stick. You just have to wash your brush well afterwards, but it will work. So I wanted to use a little bit of the chalk on this because it has a little bit of texture to it, so it takes the chalk really nicely. So watercolor ground can also double as a nice ground to use chalk pastels with. What else is on this page? I think there's a little bit of tempera paint stick also on this page. So the nice thing about chalk on like old book pages and probably on some of your ephemera is it can blend into that old soft paper really nicely. Kind of disappears into the surface. Like when you put lotion on your hands when your skin is really dry and it just kind of disappears. That's what the chalk does on this old paper. Okay. So we'll work on it in this direction for a little bit to get a little bit more vibrant. This might end up becoming the live stream of neon yellow. There's the word hope here. So I kind of wanted to highlight that a little bit more with this more vibrant color. Because the page, if I remember correctly, the page from this book was actually maybe not a very hopeful page, but when you pull out the words that mean something to you, you can end up changing the meaning to be meaningful in your own life. So if pieces of the ephemera have things on it that you're like, I don't really resonate with that, we'll find a way to make it work for you. And if it doesn't, then just paint over the whole thing and you've got something with an interesting texture. Okay, so I like the way this is kind of shining a little bit more. And I don't know what I'll add to it next, but I definitely need to wash my fingers off before I do anything else. Okay. So this page only has chalk, so I can turn the page. So I wanted to show how the chalks worked on something that's more meant for chalk. So this is like a charcoal paper, a toned charcoal paper with a little bit of ink over the top of it. And you should have all received kind of a gradient of chalks, which means that you can play some with the blending. So to do a gradient, and you can blend these together one at a time, or you can go in and put kind of your blocks of color in. And then really blend them together until you can't really tell where one color starts and another one ends. The chalk works better on paper with some kind of a texture or a tooth to it. So old paper works nicely, charcoal paper like this. anything with a ground to it. Or you can do it on the more smooth paper in the journal and put something over top like water, or put it onto nori paste. Okay, so your nori paste is going to become your really good friend in this journal. You can do so many different things with it. Okay, so that ended up being nice and bright. I'm wondering about this little thing. Seems to be exactly the right size. So I believe everyone received some kind of translucent something in your envelope. I like the way that's just right on this page and protects part of this here. Now for this, nori paste, it says, can work on glass and can work on all sorts of things. So why don't we do this as an experiment together, and we'll reflect back on it later and see how it went. But let's see what happens. If we take nori paste on the back of this, this is a transparency sheet. So if it works on glass, it should work on this, right? Stands to reason. Also said you can use nori paste on metal. Those of you who are familiar with graffiti work know that wheat pasting is a thing, right? Same principle, same stuff. Glue it up outside. Okay. So we'll stick that down there, and then we'll see what happens later, I guess. But why don't we take a little bit, I have a little bit more of that paper, and I could put a little bit here and going over the edge. I think your first couple days or weeks of playing with the materials, really encourage you to just experiment and see what works for you. Some people like to try all the materials right away, all at once, and some people like to just explore with one for a while until they feel brave and then start to work the other ones in. There's really not a right or a wrong way. Okay. All right, so let's set that aside. And we'll just check in on our bleeding art tissue. It's still pretty wet, so we're gonna let that go. But first, I just want to show you what happens on the next page. This is my favorite thing. I love what happens when pigment from one side bleeds through to the next. I know some people have feelings about that, but I only have positive feelings about that because it ends up creating something really interesting that, again, gets rid of that blank page worry and means that you don't have to think so much about what's next. Okay, so let's go to another page with the watercolor ground on it. There. Okay, so this page, some of you may have seen this on Instagram the other day. I was kind of teasing some of the things that I was playing with while I was preparing for session. So this page has ink on this side, leftover ink from a project at work. So shout out Enzo Village if you're watching right now. This is from the poster that we did for the nourishment team to thank them. And oh my gosh, there's a little bird right outside my window going into my birdhouse. It's very cute. Bird distraction. And this side has that same watercolor ground over here. So I was thinking I could play first with a little bit of the chalk. I'm going to go around the edge here. I'm going to pull up the texture in the watercolor ground. And I'm intentionally using a lot of chalk today because I know that some people are fearful of this material, and I want to show you that it's much more versatile than you maybe thought it was, and it's much more fun to use. You know, just don't use it on your white couch. Many of you know I like to put, this is a pet, I want to say, pet relief pad. Make sure you get the unscented ones, but they make a really great surface protector for under your art journaling. Okay, so now I've got that texture really nicely showing up there. And I am going to get something ready for a little more nori paste. So I'm going to take, this is a colored pencil stick. And what I'm doing now is I want to get just a light enough area so that the thing I'm going to put over the top will show up. One of the other things that came in my ephemera envelope is this little jar. And I really, really love, some of you have seen me do things with jars before. I think it's such a powerful metaphor, such a powerful image, this empty jar that you can fill with all sorts of things. I know I'm cutting away some of this interesting background color, but I might end up using that, which is why I'm cutting carefully. So I end up having both the jar as well as the negative space of the jar. And that one I'll probably put on that side because I think it'll stick a little better. So then I'll put on this side. And I'm going to use the nori paste again for this. So this is thicker paper than the tissue I was using, but it'll also work here. And there's a little bit of water on my brush, so it is watered down a little bit. And it's okay to paint right over the top of this because it's a wheat paste, a rice paste. I can paint with watercolor or use colored pencil, or use any kind of media over the top of that and it'll still work. So it's a little different than like a matte medium, which would create a resist, and then I would be stuck with the white of the paper, which is also fine. You know, it's fun. You all know I like to play with resist in my journals, but this enables you kind of a little more flexibility with what you're creating. I'm going to put this down intentionally kind of open here, like the jar escaped. So save the pieces you cut out from because they might end up making this really interesting echo that you can play with a little bit. Okay, so we'll set that aside to dry. And this is getting closer. So in a perfect world, you would let this dry until the tissue is peeling up, but it's not quite there. I think what I'm going to do is just put a piece of wax paper here and go on to another page. And we'll come back to that.
Hello,
I
Erin.
want to show what the bleeding tissue can. Yes.
Just want to pop in here and let you know that we are halfway through the lesson.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. So I want to show what the bleeding tissue would do on watercolor paper. So I stuck a piece of watercolor paper in here. This is also watercolor ground, so this one is kind of a creamy colored one. So with this one, I want to show a little bit of a different way to play with this. So just brush a little more. So I'm going to paint this all the way, and I'm going to put my round one just flat. And I get quite a bit of water on that surface. And really saturate it. And you can see how much pigment is coming off of just that one small little circle. This is actually what the sun looked like the other morning when I was paddling on the bay. It was coming up this like big round orb over the over the horizon of the Berkeley Hills. So that is pretty fun to watch, right? Just like all of this pigment coming out of this. So a question that you might have is, well, can I just use any tissue paper to do this? And the answer is no, because if every tissue paper did this, we wouldn't wrap things in tissue paper, right? Because then you could never take presents out anywhere where it might possibly rain. Because what if you bought someone a white blouse and wrapped it in, I don't know, pink tissue paper, and they end up with a pink splotchy blouse as a present. So most tissue paper that you buy like in a gift store, or that probably most tissue paper that you receive gifts in, can be wonderful for like using with your nori paste, but it won't do this. So you have to specifically get the bleeding art tissue. So I wanted to show something else that you can do with it, which is you can cut it. You don't have to use the solid piece. You kind of cut interesting shapes with it and add them onto the wet paper. And you can see that the orange is starting to now go up that lavender. Extend away. So I'm not pushing it down onto the surface, I'm just kind of letting it fall onto the surface. The page is curling right now because this is a really thick piece of watercolor paper that I glued into the journal, but it'll flatten back out. So one of the things that I hope for your journals is they get really big and fat and full over the course of the quarter that we're working on them. This other piece of lavender over here. So you'll find that some colors bleed more than others, but they all leave a little bit of pigment on the page. You can see that orange is definitely the overpowering one here, though. And I think what I'm going to do, while this page is a little bit damp, is just do some thin lines on this page. So this pen will also bleed when it touches a wet area or when water touches it, which means that the thickness of the line will change. So I like mark making onto a page that is partially wet, partially dry, because you end up getting these interesting variations in line. Okay, so while that side is drying, I want to show another way that you can use the chalks, which is with a brush. And you can get a little bit of the pigment of the chalk onto the brush. And then it's like you have dry, chalky watercolors. So one word of warning is if you really, really saturate your chalks, they will get a little bit hard and be a little less soft when you're drawing with them on paper. But if you don't mind that, this can be a really fun way to just use a little tiny bit of that color. A little bit flat over here. So these lines later could end up being kind of an interesting place to write into, or areas to fill in with other color. So I'm thinking I want maybe a little bit more of that orange. And look how even that little tiny, very thin line of black, when the water touches it, it bleeds just the right amount, because it's just a very small amount of ink that's on the page. So when I'm working on a page like this that really doesn't have necessarily a theme or like emotional content yet, I like to just play with color and let the materials and the color help me decide what the page ends up being about in the end. And it might just be that it's about playing with color. And then it might be that I find something in it later that is relevant to my life in some way. Meaning some way that I could, describe to you. It's all relevant to my life, right? I created it. Okay, so you can see what the lavender is doing over here, a little less color coming out. Again, some of the colors will bleed more from the tissue. So hot tip, the orange, kind of magenta color, the black, the brown. So if you got black and brown and you were disappointed, you should feel lucky, because those colors are really, really vibrant and fun with how they work. Okay, let's set that aside for a minute. And I am going to put the rest of my ephemera into my envelope, because I don't want to lose it. As I'm sure you can imagine, a lot of ephemera in my house, and it runs wild. So I want to make sure that I still have my ephemera from this box to play with. Okay. So that's seeming like it's going to stick to that page pretty well. It's not all the way dry, but I can see it's not peeling up. Sometimes with these transparency films with plastic, if you use like Elmer's glue or any other kind of water-based adhesive, it'll peel up. But that's sitting pretty flat onto the page, which is good to see. Okay, so this chalk will move around quite a bit. So I'm actually going to show what happens just as an experiment to compare later. This is matte medium. So I'm going to go over the chalk now with matte medium, which is going to react differently than going over it with nori paste or putting nori paste down first. You can see it's dulling the color quite a bit. So it'll be interesting to compare here with the matte medium versus here, which is nori paste. And I'm going to take a pencil and just scribble into the surface of that matte medium, which will give me some more interesting textures to play with later. All right, so we'll set that aside and let that one dry. Okay, I think we can peel this up now. So when I do the bleeding art tissue, I use it in one of my art therapy classes with my students, and it's always just such a fun, messy. I mean, some of my students, their hands look more pigmented than mine right now. Just like covered in bleeding art tissue pigment, and then they go to lunch, and then they come back, and we get to peel these up, and it's so satisfying, because you never know what's going to be underneath there. It's like using plastic wrap with watercolor, but even more unpredictable and fun. So you can see where the water has settled in the outside line of the tissue paper. And again, don't throw these away, because look at how beautiful these are. So now you have these really interesting new pieces. And these are very delicate, but this is the perfect thing to use the nori paste with, because it's very delicate. So you can put them, the Nori paste down first, and then this down over the top. Okay, we're going to another chair. So then we'll have kind of this interesting echo of that previous page. Actually, maybe what I'll do is put one on one page and one on the other. So how much nori paste do you need? If it's thin paper like this, you don't need a whole lot. I could water this down a little bit and it would still stick this well, but I want to have a little bit of the texture of it on the page. And you can see that with this stiff bristled brush, I can go back over the top and get it pretty flat, even though it was very wrinkly when I put it down there. So some of you might be familiar with Yes paste, which is another kind of paste that you can use in book arts and journaling. The advantage of nori paste over Yes paste is, number one, it's a lot easier to clean. Number two, it's a lot softer and smoother to spread. I've also found that some of you may remember seen this from past ArtJournalSnacks journals. If you put it too thickly on your page, when you turn the pages of your book, it ends up crackling, which can be interesting, and you can play with that, but it can also be heartbreaking because it might ruin the imagery that was underneath what you put the Yes paste on. So no shade to Yes paste, but I do like nori paste better. And if you're keeping track, that does move it up in the hierarchy of Erin's favorite adhesives, but we all know my favorite, so will always be, glue stick will always be my fave. Okay. So I like having a page like this with like two similar but different things, because this can be a stimulus for a lot of different things that you might end up journaling about, right? Like a before and after, or two different emotions you might be feeling, or even two different people, right? They can kind of come together. You could make these into two different characters, like put a head on each one, maybe a cutout from a magazine. So many different possibilities from a very simple beginning to a page. In there. All right, we'll go back to our jar page and see how we're doing. So you can see this dries pretty quickly. It's a little bit tacky still. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit longer. But the sheen that it has a little tiny bit of a satin look to it, but not too much. Actually, before I turn this page, I want to do something kind of bold, since bold seems to be one of the colors. So this is a big, thick Montana marker. Oh my goodness. An entire gigantic tow truck just pulled up outside my place. Hope they're not going to try to tow me. It's like a big rig. This was that shop blue, but I ran out of the shop blue, so I filled it with some green, and then I found more shop blue and put that back in. So now it's a custom color. And I'm just going to use this to stamp a little bit around the edge, because this color, I was realizing as I was working on the page, the color is just right. So one of the things that's fun to do with your materials is experiment with the different ways that you can make patterns with them. How can this brush be a stamp? How can this marker do something different than just write? Okay, so thinking outside the box with the materials and seeing what happens. Okay. And you can see here on the watercolor ground where the acrylic marker is kind of seeping into that a little bit. And I'm going to play with that a little bit more. A little bit of water on my brush while this acrylic marker is still wet. And you can use this with your Liquitex markers too. So any of these acrylic markers, acrylic is a water-based paint. So you can, while it's still wet, just remember that this is a water-based acrylic paint. So make sure you wash your brush after you do this. But you can go in and move some of that around, and then it stops becoming marks made with the tip of a marker and just starts becoming an interesting pattern. So if you take away just enough of those predictable marks, it starts looking like something a little different. That's really fun. So we'll let that dry a little bit. Good thing about live streaming when it's hot is the materials dry pretty quickly. So that matte medium is already almost dry. So go back in. And this is a colored pencil stick. Unfortunately discontinued. One of those heartbreaking art material discontinued stories. There's an alternative, but it's just not quite the same. What I like about using these is they play up the texture in a different way, and it complements the way that the texture works with the chalk pastel. Colored pencil and chalk pastel in traditional ways of working don't play super well together because the colored pencil can push the chalk pastel off the surface. But when you're using it this way, where you're kind of using it more of a mixed media style, they do play together kind of nicely. Getting a little bit more of that vibrant color back in this. Get a little bit of So you can use the acrylic paint pen onto a wet page. Maybe I'll do another page where I only do that. And it thins it out a little bit. You don't want to do that too much because the water will kind of backflow into the marker a little bit. It's not the end of the world. You can get it flowing thickly again, but it just is a thing to be aware of. Sarah and I were talking about eating out of the garden before you all came on, and this seems to have like a summer garden feel to it. I already recently did a page with a big tomato on it, and I wish I had a cut out of a tomato for this page, but maybe I'll find like a zucchini or something to go here. It's got very summer garden vibes. Put that there so we can turn some of these pages. Okay. I wanted to play with this page that I did today at my desk. So again, your art journal should travel with you everywhere. I always have mine with me. It always sits at my desk, usually between me and my keyboard and my laptop. So it's right there in front of me. So if you're ever on a Zoom call with me or you're getting an email from me, probably between me and the keyboard and you is my art journal. Just full disclosure, it's right there. And why don't we play a little bit more with this idea of acrylic paint pen onto wet surface. So this already has the wax crayon from last time's box. It has some watercolor, and it has some rubber stamp ink. And I'm just going to take this super bright neon. Again, a color combination you might not think would work, but it really does. Neon in this rich magenta and crimson. See how it just disappears? Just kind of fades into the water. And it stops looking like an acrylic paint pen at all. So this tool that might seem like it just does one thing, right? It's just an acrylic paint pen. It puts down layers of acrylic paint. That's what it does. You can use it in so many different ways, even on the same page. You get these wildly different effects. So you get these kind of interesting straight lines. I'm just tapping with the very, very side of the chisel point right now. So just on this one page, a lot of variation just using one tool. And then here, this is almost just asking for a little tiny bit. And that's one of those things that you could just sit and watch the paint spread, which is better than watching paint dry, right? The other day we were doing some watercolor at work, and I encouraged someone to pick up a paper and blow on it, and it ended up turning into this really interesting thing. So don't be afraid. I won't do it right now because it'll make a loud sound, but don't be afraid to tilt your pages and get the paint to move around.
Hey, Erin.
Yeah.
Sarah popping in here. We've got a couple questions in the chat. I just posted a little description here. Someone let a piece of ephemera inspire the color palette and mark making on a spread. I intended to use that as the background for the ephemera, but it blends in too much and won't pop off the page. Any ideas, or should I just use the ephemera somewhere else?
Good question. So one thing you could do, and this is one of the nice things about the chisel point on this, is you can make a little frame for your ephemera. You know, like almost like you're making a little art frame for it. And you could do that either before you glue it down or afterwards. Another thing that you could do is darken or lighten the spot where you're going to put the ephemera, so that you're kind of creating almost a glow or a little bit of shadow that it's disappearing into. That's a little more subtle. That's something that either the lighter or the darker colors of your chalk pastels will do really nicely. Let me see if I can find a page to show you what I mean. Okay. All right, so if I have a dark piece of ephemera somewhere. Yeah. So I have this photograph, vintage photograph, and it has its own frame, right? But if it didn't, or if I wanted it to pop off the page more than this, one thing I could do is take one of the lighter colors and know that it's okay, it's about that big. And I've got all my colors there on the background. I'm doing something a little bit lighter. To make this stand out. So see how now it stands out a whole lot more? It pops up off the surface quite a bit more. And then I'll show you the other thing that I mean in a sec here. So this is an old photograph. It is kind of thick, so I'm going to put the Nori piece actually on the back of this, and I'm going to do it kind of thick because I know I'm also going onto a textured surface. So I want to think about those two things sticking together. So the other thing you could do, assuming this is my color palette, is just kind of go in and put a little more pigment of a different color around the edge. Now, if what you're working with is all very light, the other thing you can think about is maybe this page ends up being a page that I do some writing over the top once it's dry, right? If it's very faded and light, you could think about it as a future home for some writing. And I guess likewise, if it's very dark, you could also use a light material to write on it over the top, right? So sometimes pages end up being just the right place to do some writing later. Flatten that down a little bit more. Okay. So I wanted to show you, because I told you that I would. There we go. Oh yeah, I teased this the other day on Mix or on Instagram. I don't remember which, but something that we did at Enzo the other day is we each chose a natural material and we drew it 3 different times, right? So here's the first. This was the second. Then I kind of had a third that was just the shadow from holding this, and then I did just a silhouette. So playing with this idea of how a page can start with one thing and then you replicate it 3 different times. So it's a different version of our one material 3 ways. It's instead one topic 3 different ways. So let's go back and see how this tissue paper is doing, because I think we can peel it up now. Again, I'm going to save these because look at these interesting stripes that are on here, which I might end up with Nori paste actually sticking all of these back onto this page. Take them all off for right now. Cool, so that ended up looking really interesting. But the thing that I'm noticing when I'm looking at it is the 2 pages seem very separate from each other. We have a little bit of the purple over here, but not very much of the orange over here, so I'll probably want to put a little more orange on this side. It might mean some of this. And maybe what I'll do is cut my circle and add it on.
Hey, Erin, just popping in here to let you know there's 15 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I can use, another thing you might find about the Nori piece is it goes over the gutter, you know, the part between the two pages, a little more nicely than some of our other adhesives do. Because it's just a thinner adhesive. It also doesn't stick to itself when it dries the way that like a gloss medium or a Mod Podge sometimes can. I'm gonna move something so I can get a little closer to this. Okay. So here where I have this edge where the watercolor paper hits the regular paper of the book, I'm going to use these guys to bridge that edge a little bit. I'm using kind of a thick utility brush with this right now. You don't have to. Nori paste is much more gentle on your art tools than other kinds of adhesives are. It just happens to be the brush that I have close by that's a flat brush. In your ephemera envelopes, you receive just kind of a little taste of the bleeding art tissue. It comes in gigantic packages. So if you like it, I highly recommend it. Just make sure you store it somewhere that you won't accidentally spill a bunch of water. But it's fun because it's a more than one use material. And as we go through this quarter's live streams and our fun together on ArtSnacks Mix, which is our online community, I'll also show some different ways that you can use the Nori paste, both with our other ArtJournalSnacks materials as well as with other things. It's a really, really versatile material. Over here. Let's set that one aside. Okay. I'm going to show a little bit of this journal carefully. So this one's got a really good edge going on it so far because it kind of started out that way with all of its very worn pages. And this one I started on the 13th of this month. And again, there's lots of text in here that I've gone over with everything. This was something we did at work. So was that. And so was that. And these were some other things we were playing with. You can see like lots of different colors here. This page definitely needs a little bit of chalk. And this was a page that has some writing on it. And some of the writing I wanted to keep visible, and some of the writing I wanted to obscure. So the remember this part felt important. And this other part, I wanted it to kind of fade into the background because it felt needed in the moment to write it. And then it also felt like I wanted it to fade into the background. And so what the Remember This was about was this experience of making art with other people in a room, and it was very silent and quiet and lovely, and not thinking about other frustrating things. Because what really matters, right? Like the things that matter are the things that feel good and that help you feel creative. That's what really matters. I want to make that stand out a tiny bit more. And actually I want to try something on this page because I haven't tried it before. So I wonder how some of you, not many, but some of you may have gotten a feather donation from Griffin or Sammy in your little ephemera envelopes. And I wanted to see, adhesives are kind of hit and miss with bird feathers. Sometimes it works and sometimes it really doesn't. So let's see how Nori paste does with Griffin's red tail feather here. I think it's going to work nicely because it is a pretty strong hold without having to paint it over the top. Because that's where we get into trouble with bird feathers, is if you paint over the top with any kind of adhesive, it kind of ruins the feather and you don't see the color anymore. But it seems like that's going to work really nicely. And I just want the word "this" to stand out a little better. Okay. So one page can take you all the way through an experience. Meaning maybe you sit down to work in your journal and you're having a hard day or something frustrating just happened and you need to kind of scratch it out on the page, and then things change, right? And you can continue to let the page evolve and let your feelings change, and maybe it ends up being a positive page after all. Stand out a little bit more even. All right. I like the way that's coming out. All right, let's go. Got a little bit of time, so let's go back to the jar page here and see where we are. There's one more little thing that I might end up putting on this page. I have just some little bits that are cut out from something else, and it occurred to me that the shape of them is kind of similar to those other marks I was making. I kind of like the idea of having a couple more cutout things on this page. I think that's what I want to do quickly. See, normally this is a situation that I would be reaching for my glue stick, but I am having a lot of fun using the Nori paste. It does a little bit more of what I talked about before with this idea of going back against the edge of something you're sticking down so that it sticks a little better, kind of blends in a little bit better, or weaves in a little more to the texture of the page. One more little pink. Okay. So eventually the jar will get something, maybe, or maybe something connecting between the two jars. I'm not sure yet. Have to see what happens. And that's one of the fun things that I love about doing all this journaling with you all, is we all get to see how each other's pages and journals evolve as we keep going. And it's really been very fun to explore that with you all. And if you've been hanging out with me for any period of time, you know that sometimes I start winding it down in my words, and then I see something else that I feel like I want to put onto the page, and I go back into it. So this is just more of the same. Felt like I needed something a little warmer on this page, maybe because I know I'm going to look for some kind of summer garden produce. All right. My pencils are very, very seldom for actually writing long stretches of words with these days. All right. Well, we are close to the end. I wanted to see if there were any last questions or excitements about any of the materials, things that people were enjoying playing with so far, or things people were struggling with. Of course, you know, you can always reach out to me on that was a flash from the past, on Instagram or on Mix.
Were you about to say live journal?
I was.
Oh my gosh.
Talking about being an 80s kid with the fluorescent, and I just was like back in nostalgia in my mind. Yes, I was on LiveJournal.
I think I was on LiveJournal back in the day too, but that is irrelevant.
Super funny.
Erin, you made so many beautiful pages, so many spreads.
Yeah, it was a lot.
You did so much in this 90 minutes. I just put a message at the bottom for those who want to keep up with ArtJournalSnacks. Highly recommend you join mix.artsnacks.co if you aren't already. That's where you can message Dr. Erin if you have questions. And that's also a space where you can share your art journal spreads. And then, of course, we're on Instagram at ArtJournalSnacks. And Dr. Erin is the one who runs that Instagram account. So you have options. Let's see, anybody in the chat want to share any findings, any discoveries, any colors that you loved? Oh, love this. Such a messy session. Love it. Agreed.
Yeah, and look at what my water wipe ended up being, like, really interesting. Yep.
Amazing. Yeah, this was definitely a messy session, and I anticipate that it'll be like that this season because of the pastels and the nori paste.
Yeah.
All right, we have another comment here. I love the nori paste. Also an 80s kids here.
Yeah, see all this fun neon.
Love that. And feel free to message me on Mix. I'm Sarah Rubenstein on Mix. If you have any feedback about this platform, I know that I was chatting with some people in the comments. This is a new platform for us. It makes it a lot more accessible for those who did not have access to Zoom. We were previously on Zoom. We like this a lot more. It's accessible, it's dynamic, it's just so much more interactive for the host. So you can get one-on-one time if you'd like in ArtSnacks Mix, but for these live streams, this is where it's at. We are really enjoying it. So if you have any feedback, please feel free to message me, and we'll see what we can do. We are always evolving and always learning.
Yeah, and I take requests for different things you want me to cover on the live stream. So please do reach out either on Instagram or Mix. I'm happy to either do quick sessions on Mix to cover it or do them on our one of our upcoming live streams. So.
Awesome. All right, we're at time. So Erin, thank you so much for your time and for this awesome lesson.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We will see you in the next one.